Before we begin, please leave a comment, share your thoughts and let us know your lessons learned in the comment section below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. In the small, desolate town of Willowbrook, where poverty clung to the cobbled streets like an ever-present shadow, lived Arthur and Clara, a married couple bound by love but shackled by relentless hardship. Arthur, a skilled mechanic with hands that could breathe life back into any broken engine, worked tirelessly at his modest repair shop. Yet, despite his hard work, his shop barely kept the bills paid, let alone filled their stomachs. Clara, his wife, was a seamstress, but even with her steady hands and keen eye for detail, her earnings barely made a dent in the mounting debts they both carried. Arthur had always believed that his talent as a mechanic was enough to provide for his family. But as the years passed, he watched his hopes slowly crumble. He'd once dreamed of opening a large auto repair business, a thriving workshop where he could hire apprentices and expand. But fate had other plans. His first shop had caught fire, twice, and with each disaster, his dreams slipped further from his grasp. He had no choice but to start over, this time focusing on his craft. He became a mechanic for hire, fixing cars from the local town and beyond. Yet, the cycle of struggle continued. No matter how much effort he put into his work, the bills piled up, and the luxury of having a proper meal seemed like a far-off dream. At night, when the house was quiet and the flickering candlelight illuminated Clara's tired face, Arthur couldn't help but wonder what went wrong. He knew he was good at what he did, better than most, but that didn't seem to matter. There were always people like Daniel, his childhood friend, who seemed to be able to coast through life effortlessly. Daniel had moved away from Willowbrook years ago to start his own business. And now he was a wealthy entrepreneur. He had a grand house, fancy cars, and the life Arthur had once dreamed of. Arthur had tried asking for help before, but Daniel always offered nothing more than hollow words of encouragement. One cold evening, after a long day of repairing a dilapidated truck, Arthur was sitting in his modest living room when the door creaked open. Clara entered, holding their son, Lucas, in her arms. He was only 8 years old but already knew what it felt like to want more. His wide eyes, full of hope and dreams, seemed to pierce through Arthur's heart. Clara set the boy down to play, then sat beside Arthur, her face etched with concern. "I know you're working hard, Arthur, but I'm starting to fear that it's not enough," Clara said softly, her voice trembling. "Lucas deserves more than this." Arthur looked down at his hands, calloused from years of labor. He wanted so badly to give his family the life they deserved. But every attempt to climb out of the hole seemed to drag him deeper. He sighed heavily, his mind racing. "I know. It feels like no matter what I do, nothing changes. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this." That night, as Clara tried to comfort him, Arthur lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He had tried everything. He worked harder, prayed more, and even fasted at times, hoping for a miracle, but the miracle never came. He couldn't shake the feeling that there had to be another way. He couldn't bear the thought of continuing this way. What good was a life if he couldn't even provide for his own family? Then, as if fate had been listening to his desperate thoughts, Daniel came knocking. The doorbell rang late the next evening, and when Arthur opened it, there stood Daniel, with a broad grin on his face, dressed in a tailored suit that screamed success. He looked every bit the man Arthur wished he could be. "Arthur, it's been too long, my friend," Daniel exclaimed, slapping him on the back as he entered. He handed Arthur a small, elegant box. "I have something for you." Arthur took the box, confused, and opened it to reveal a small, ornate idol. It was intricately carved, glistening in the light, and seemed to pulse with a strange energy. "What is this?" Arthur asked, bewildered. "It's an offering," Daniel replied cryptically. "There's a man, a Baba, who can change your life. He has powers beyond what you can imagine. I went to him when I was struggling, just like you. And now, look at me. I'm living proof of what he can do." Arthur listened, captivated by the words. Daniel spoke of wealth beyond imagination, a life of luxury that could be theirs if they followed the Baba's ritual. Arthur's first instinct was to dismiss it as nonsense, but the desperation in his heart whispered otherwise. The Baba asked for nothing but a small price. Daniel continued, his eyes glinting with something Arthur couldn't quite place. "The price is simple, blood. But not human blood, just a cow." Nothing more. The gods will answer your prayers. And your family will be set for life. Arthur's heart raced. Could this be true? Could a ritual like this really change everything? He didn't know. But the promise of wealth. The promise of finally being able to give Clara and Lucas the life they deserved, was too tempting to resist. The more Daniel spoke of the Baba's powers, the more Arthur's doubts faded away. Think about it, Arthur, Daniel urged, sensing his hesitation. How much longer do you want to live like this? The Baba has helped me. And now I can help you. As Arthur's mind whirled, Clara entered the room, having overheard the conversation. Her face went pale as she looked from the idol in Arthur's hands to Daniel. What is this? She asked, her voice trembling with fear. It's a ritual, Arthur explained, his voice tinged with a mix of hope and fear. Daniel says it will make us rich. It's just a small sacrifice. A cow's blood. Clara recoiled. You're not seriously considering this, are you? Blood? A cow's blood? What if there's more to it than that? What if it asks for more than we can give? Arthur felt torn. But the promise of a better life, of a chance to break free from their endless struggles, clouded his judgment. Clara, this is our chance. We've tried everything else. We can't keep living like this. The conflict swirled inside Clara, her love for Arthur battling her instincts and fear. But what if it's wrong? What if we pay a price we can never repay? I don't know, Arthur replied, his voice heavy with uncertainty. But I can't keep watching us drown in poverty. Clara fell silent, her face a mix of sadness and worry. She didn't want to lose Arthur. But she also didn't want to lose her soul. She had heard whispers of people making deals with the devil, trading their morals for material wealth. Was this the same thing? As the night stretched on, Arthur's resolve grew stronger. He had heard enough. He didn't want to live in poverty anymore. He would do anything to give his family a better life. He turned to Daniel, determination hardening in his chest. I'll do it. We'll go to the Baba tomorrow. Daniel smiled widely, his eyes gleaming. You won't regret it, I promise you. But Clara, her heart heavy with dread, had already made her decision. She would follow her husband, even if it meant walking into a nightmare. The next morning, a strange tension hung in the air as Arthur and Clara prepared to follow Daniel to the Baba. Clara's mind was a whirlwind of doubt and fear. She had always been a woman of faith, believing that good things came to those who worked hard and waited patiently. But now, in the face of unrelenting poverty, those beliefs were beginning to crack. She couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that something was wrong with the path Arthur was so determined to take. Arthur, on the other hand, had already made up his mind. The promise of wealth had awakened something deep inside him, a yearning for a life beyond the struggle. His hands, calloused from years of work, ached for a chance to rest, for a moment of peace, a glimpse of the comfort that had always eluded him, the vision of his family, living in luxury, enjoying the fruits of his labor, consumed him. No longer would they be trapped in this endless cycle of hardship. No longer would Clara look at him with those eyes full of unspoken disappointment. The Baba was located on the outskirts of the town, nestled in a small, mysterious village that seemed to exist outside of time. As they made their way down the dirt road, Clara's stomach twisted with unease. The landscape grew more barren, the trees taller and darker, as if the earth itself was trying to keep them away from whatever lay ahead. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional sound of birds in the distance. When they arrived at the Baba's compound, Arthur's heart raced with anticipation. The Baba's home was an old, weathered house with strange symbols carved into the walls, and the smell of incense filled the air. The Baba himself was an imposing figure, a tall, gaunt man with deep-set eyes that seemed to look through them rather than at them. His clothes were simple but had an otherworldly aura about them, as though they had been worn for centuries. Welcome, Arthur and Clara, the Baba's voice echoed, deep and melodic, as though he had been expecting them. I know why you have come. Clara felt a chill run down her spine, and for the first time, she truly believed that they had crossed a line that could never be undone. The Baba led them inside, where the room was dimly lit by flickering candles. In the center of the room was a small altar, surrounded by odd trinkets and animal bones. The air was thick with the scent of burning herbs, and Clara's head began to swim with the disorienting mix of incense and fear. Why are you doing this? Clara whispered to Arthur, her voice barely a breath. We don't know what he will ask for. This could be a mistake. Arthur turned to her, his face resolute but tinged with desperation. We've already made our choice. Clara, this is our chance. We can't keep living like this. I will do anything to make sure we have a better life. The Baba raised his hand, silencing their conversation. The gods are waiting, he said, his voice taking on a rhythmic cadence as he began to chant. The blood must be offered. The sacrifice must be pure. Arthur's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped closer to the altar. The Baba handed him a knife, its blade gleaming in the dim light. He had to make a choice. A part of him, deep inside, wanted to run, to leave before it was too late. But another part, the part that had been crushed by years of poverty, felt a cold resolve settle in his bones. He had come this far. He couldn't turn back now. This is what I must do, Arthur whispered, almost to himself. He took the knife, his grip trembling. Clara's eyes widened in horror. Arthur, please, don't do this. We don't know what we're dealing with. But it was too late. The Baba's incantations grew louder, and the air around them seemed to thicken with an otherworldly energy. Clara watched in helpless horror as Arthur, almost in a trance, approached the altar. He placed the knife in his hand, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Then, with a grim expression, he raised the blade high, prepared to offer what was required. But just as the knife hovered above the altar, the Baba suddenly halted his chanting, his dark eyes narrowing. You are not ready yet, he said. His voice was sharp, cutting through the tension that had settled over the room. The gods require a greater sacrifice. Clara's heart dropped. She had known deep down that this was never going to be simple. But the truth of the Baba's words filled her with a terror she couldn't suppress. What do you mean? Arthur asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The gods require the blood of the one you love the most, the Baba said, his voice like a snake's hiss. The blood of the most precious person in your life. Clara froze. A cold dread washed over her as the implications of the Baba's words settled in. She knew, as surely as she knew her own name, that the sacrifice was meant to be her son, Lucas, the blood of the one they loved most. No, Clara cried out, stepping back. You can't mean that. Not Lucas. He's just a child. Arthur's face twisted in anguish as he turned to Clara. His eyes, once filled with hope, were now shadowed with an agonizing mix of fear and determination. I don't want to do this, he said, his voice trembling, but we've come this far. This is our only chance. Do you want to keep living like this, Clara? Clara's mind spun as the room seemed to close in on her. Her love for Arthur battled with her protective instincts for Lucas, the child who had been her joy. Her reason for fighting through the long, hard days was now to be sacrificed for a life they could only dream of. Could she stand by and let this happen? I won't let you do this, Clara shouted, her voice breaking. She backed away from the altar. But the Baba's gaze held her in place. You have no choice, the Baba intoned. The ritual must be completed. The gods will not wait. Clara's breath came in ragged gasps, her mind racing as she looked at Arthur. He stood there, the knife still in his hand, as if torn between his love for his family and his desperation for wealth. Arthur, please, Clara begged, we can find another way. We can't, but the Baba interrupted, his tone final. There is no other way. As the weight of the situation crashed down on them, Arthur's resolve began to crumble. The reality of what they were about to do became all too clear. They had come seeking wealth. But at what cost? How far had they already fallen into this dark, twisted world? The ritual was beginning to consume them both in ways they hadn't imagined. And with every passing moment, the price of their desires became clearer. It wasn't just a cow's blood that the gods required, it was their very souls. Would Arthur be able to step back from the brink? Or would he sacrifice everything, including the love of his life, for a life of unimaginable wealth? The air in the Baba's temple grew thick with an eerie silence as Clara and Arthur stood frozen, caught between the ancient forces at play and their own fractured desires. The Baba's words, like a final decree from the gods themselves, rang in their ears. The sacrifice must be made, he had said, his voice a chilling whisper that seemed to echo through the very walls of the temple. But what did it mean? Clara's heart thudded painfully in her chest, each beat a reminder that their lives had already spiraled into chaos. Arthur, too, stood motionless, torn between the love he held for his family and the desperate hunger for wealth that had brought them to this precipice. The Baba's eyes, dark as the night, watched them intently, his lips curled in an almost knowing smile. "There is no turning back," he intoned, each word feeling like an irreversible command. "The gods have made their demands. You must make your choice." Clara's mind raced, a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. She had fought so hard to protect her family, to keep them whole, but now, standing before the Baba, it seemed like all their suffering and struggle had been for naught. Her son, the one thing she loved more than anything in the world, was now at the center of this ancient ritual. And Arthur, her husband, the man she had stood by through thick and thin, was about to make the worst choice of his life. She turned to him, her eyes pleading, "Arthur, please, don't do this. I won't let you take him." Arthur's face was pale, his eyes wide with torment. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words seemed stuck, trapped in his throat. His gaze flickered between Clara and the altar where the Baba had prepared the ritual offerings. His hand still held the dagger, trembling slightly, as though it had a will of its own. The cold weight of the blade in his hand felt like the weight of his entire life, the life he had fought so hard to build. Now poised to collapse under the pressure of a single decision, the Baba stepped forward, his voice low but forceful. "You think you can escape the God's will, but you cannot. The price has been set. The ritual will proceed, and you will either be its master or its slave." Clara's voice shook with fury and desperation. "This isn't what we agreed to. You promised, no human sacrifice. Just a cow's blood." Her words hung in the air, each syllable a final plea for some semblance of mercy. The Baba's smile deepened, his eyes gleaming with cold amusement. "I did not promise you anything. The gods are not bound by your understanding of the world. Their demands are clear. Only through sacrifice will you receive what you seek." The tension in the room thickened, and for a moment, Clara felt as if the walls themselves were closing in on her. She had never imagined this, the sheer horror of the decision before them. Her love for Arthur warred with her instinct to protect Lucas. Could she really let her son die to satisfy the greed that had gripped her husband's heart? But Arthur, his face a mask of grief and fear, stepped forward. "Clara, I've come too far. You don't understand. We've suffered for so long. If I do this, we can change everything. We can have everything we've ever dreamed of. I can make sure you never have to worry about money again. I'll give you everything." His voice was frantic, desperate. He reached for Clara's hand, but she recoiled, the tears flowing freely down her face. "Arthur, please," she sobbed. "This isn't the answer. Don't do this. There's always another way." But the Baba, watching with an unsettling calm, spoke again. "You have heard the terms. There is no other way. The gods do not wait, and they do not relent. The sacrifice must be made now." In that moment, Clara's heart shattered. She couldn't stand to see the man she loved so lost, so consumed by his desire for something that, in the end, would never bring them peace. She took a deep breath and made a choice she had hoped she would never have to make. "No," she whispered, her voice a quiet, defiant tremor. "No, I won't let you do this." The Baba's eyes narrowed, his expression growing darker. "You think you have control? You are merely pawns in a game you do not understand. The gods demand their payment, and you will make it." But Clara, driven by a fierce, protective love for her son, knew what she had to do. In a single, swift motion, she reached for the ceremonial knife lying on the altar. She had never imagined holding such a blade, but in that moment, it felt like the only thing that could stop the nightmare from unfolding. Arthur's eyes widened in shock as Clara lifted the knife, her hands shaking with the weight of her decision. "Clara, no," he cried out, but his voice was too weak, too filled with fear. "I will not let him take Lucas," Clara said, her voice cold with determination. "If there's a price to be paid, then I will pay it. But not with my son's life. Not with our son's blood." For the first time, the Baba seemed to hesitate, his usual calm replaced by an unsettling shift in the air. "You would defy the gods?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "You would sacrifice everything for one life?" Clara's grip on the knife tightened. "I would sacrifice anything for my family," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside her. "But not like this. Not for a lie." Arthur's gaze flickered between Clara and the Baba, the weight of his choices bearing down on him. He had been so close to having everything. But now, standing before his wife and son, he realized that all the wealth in the world meant nothing if he lost the very things that made life worth living. He had fallen into the Baba's trap, blinded by ambition, but now he saw the truth. There was no amount of money that could replace his family. Clara, his voice cracked as the realization hit him. I'm sorry, I was wrong, but it was too late. The Baba, his eyes flashing with anger, raised his hands and began chanting in a language that seemed to vibrate with ancient power. The room was filled with a blinding light as the energy in the air crackled with an unnatural intensity. No, you cannot stop what has already begun, the Baba hissed, his voice shaking with fury. The gods demand their payment. The air around them seemed to shift, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Clara stood her ground, the knife still in her hand, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew she could not let her son die. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled, and the room seemed to explode with a force so powerful that Clara was thrown back, her body crashing into the altar. She gasped for air, struggling to regain her bearings. But when she opened her eyes, everything had changed. The Baba was gone, his presence vanishing into thin air as if he had never existed. Arthur rushed to her side, his face filled with concern. Clara, are you all right? But Clara, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief, could only stare at the empty space where the Baba had once stood. They were free, for better or for worse. They had broken the ritual's hold. The power that had sought to consume them was gone, but the cost of their actions was still unclear. As they walked away from the temple, the weight of their decisions heavy on their hearts, they realized that the true cost of ambition wasn't wealth, it was the loss of their humanity. They had come seeking riches, but what they had found was something far more valuable. The realization that the love they had for each other and their son was worth more than any fortune the world could offer. But their journey was far from over. The price of their defiance was yet to be fully paid. And as they made their way back to their home, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was still waiting for them, something that could not be undone.